What you are about to hear is not speculation. It is not propaganda from either side of this war. It is the cold, verified arithmetic of industrial-scale attrition, the kind of numbers that rewrite geopolitical equations, expose the fragility of empires, and force even the most reckless of leaders to confront the cost of their ambitions. Vladimir Putin stood before the Russian people in December 2025 and declared that his forces were advancing with confidence, grinding down the enemy, defeating Ukraine's finest Western-trained units one by one. What he did not tell them, what the Kremlin's tightly controlled state media would never dare broadcast, is that the Russian military has now suffered nearly 1.2 million casualties since the full-scale invasion began in February 2022. That figure, compiled by the Center for Strategic and International Studies, represents more losses than any major military power has endured in any war since World War II, and the bleeding has not stopped. To understand what is happening on the Eastern Front right now, you have to understand the language of attrition. It is not a language of dramatic breakthroughs or heroic charges. It is a language of meters, of days, of men fed into a machine and consumed. According to CSIS analysis, Russian forces advancing toward the strategically critical city of Pokrovsk in western Donetsk Oblast were moving at an average rate of just 70 meters per day. 70 meters. To put that in context, that is slower than Allied forces advanced during the Battle of the Somme in World War I, widely regarded as one of the most catastrophically wasteful military operations in human history. In the northern approaches around Kharkiv and Kupiansk, Russian forces were doing even worse, advancing at just 50 meters per day. A grinding, almost geological pace purchased at a price that no credible military analyst can justify. The Pokrovsk front became the defining battlefield story of 2025. For over 18 months, Russia committed some of its largest concentrations of ground forces to capturing this single city, a logistics hub of around 60,000 pre-war residents situated at the intersection of critical supply highways in Donetsk Oblast. A city whose fall, Ukrainian military expert Mikhailo Zhirokov warned, could cause the entire front line to crumble, opening the road toward Dnipro and Zaporizhzhia. Russian forces began attacking in earnest in June and July of 2024. By August of that year, a Russian grouping estimated at approximately 165,000 troops had been concentrated in the direction, yet the city held. Month after month, assault after assault, Ukraine's defenders absorbed the pressure at devastating cost to both sides. It was the same pattern that had played out in Bakhmut in 2023 and Avdiivka in 2024, Russia paying in blood for every block, every intersection, every collapsed building. Then in late 2025, the weight became too great. Russian infiltration tactics, small groups probing deep into the city under the cover of drone-disrupted skies, began to fracture Ukrainian defensive cohesion. By December of 2025, Russia claimed control of the majority of Pokrovsk. Even this victory, however, told a story of strategic failure more than triumph. According to the Institute for the Study of War, by February 2026, Russia had been unable to capitalize on the seizure, unable to make further operationally significant advances beyond the city's ruins. The so-called Fortress Belt, Ukraine's layered network of deep defensive fortifications across Donetsk Oblast, absorbed the momentum. The road to Kramatorsk, a city 4 times the size of Pokrovsk, fortified and determined, remained beyond Russia's operational reach. Putin's armies had spent 18 months and hundreds of thousands of men to capture a pile of rubble, and the war had not ended. But here is where the numbers become truly staggering, and where Putin's narrative of inevitable victory begins to collapse under its own weight. In 2025 alone, according to Ukrainian General Staff data cited by ISW, Russian forces took approximately 416,000 casualties. That is roughly 35,000 men killed, wounded, or missing every single month. In exchange for this sacrifice, Russia seized approximately 4,831 square kilometers of Ukrainian territory across the entire year, less than 1% of Ukraine's total land area. The arithmetic is brutal. Approximately 78 casualties for every square kilometer gained. And by February 2026, the Telegraph reported something even more alarming for the Kremlin. For the first time since the invasion began, Russia was losing more soldiers than it was recruiting. The losses had climbed to 40,000 per month since November 2025, while recruitment pipelines, strained by a shrinking pool of willing volunteers and the shadow of demographic collapse, could not fill the gap. The Kupiansk direction in northeastern Ukraine along the Oskil River became one of the most punishing fronts for Russian ambitions in late 2025. In November 2024, Russian forces had crossed the Oskil River and launched an offensive aimed at encircling the city of Kupiansk, a rail hub of enormous logistical significance. Over the following months, they advanced roughly 8 kilometers at their furthest point. By the end of 2025 and into early 2026, something extraordinary had occurred. According to analysis from United 24 Media, Ukraine's armed forces had almost cleared the Russian penetration near Kupiansk entirely, destroying over 1,000 Russian troops in the process. The ISW December 2025 assessment confirmed that Ukrainian forces had liberated a significant portion of several Russian penetrations, exploiting the overconcentration of Russian forces at Pokrovsk and the acute shortage of ready operational reserves elsewhere along the front. What Russia had spent months and thousands of lives to achieve was being reversed in days. The role of drone warfare in this equation cannot be overstated. The conflict in Ukraine has undergone a fundamental transformation since its opening phases. Early in the war, artillery and tank formations defined the rhythm of battle. By 2025, drone attacks had become the dominant form of warfare, both on the front lines and deep into the Russian rear. According to conflict monitor ACLED, air and drone attacks rose from roughly 6,000 events in 2023 to nearly 16,000 in 2024, and then exploded to more than 29,000 in 2025. Ukraine's long-range drone campaigns struck Russian oil refineries, air bases, and ammunition depots with increasing precision and frequency. By October 2025, Ukrainian strikes had reportedly forced nearly 40% of Russia's oil refining capacity offline. On June 1, 2025, in a single extraordinary operation, Ukraine destroyed an estimated 11 to 12 Russian strategic bombers, aircraft that take years to build and cannot simply be replaced. Each of these strikes was not just a tactical success. Each one was a message to Moscow. The geography of this war extends far beyond the front line. The North Korean dimension added a layer of grim surrealism to an already extraordinary conflict. In late 2024 and into 2025, an estimated 10,000 to 12,000 North Korean troops were deployed to Russia's Kursk Oblast to help repel Ukraine's audacious cross-border incursion. The August 2024 offensive, in which Ukrainian forces seized over 1,000 square kilometers of Russian territory, captured around 100 settlements, and took hundreds of Russian prisoners of war. The North Koreans, initially vulnerable to Ukraine's drone warfare, began adapting their tactics over time. Ukraine captured only 2 North Korean POWs. Many soldiers, according to reporting by the Kyiv Independent, chose to take their own lives rather than surrender. The strategic calculus of the Kursk incursion remains hotly debated. It drew over 60,000 Russian troops away from the Donetsk front, but may have accelerated Russian gains there in the process. By March 2025, most Ukrainian forces had withdrawn. The gambit had cost both sides enormously. But it had proved something the world needed to see. Russia's borders were not inviolable. Putin's home territory was not beyond reach. What does all of this mean in the wider strategic picture? The Center for Strategic and International Studies offered a verdict in February 2026 that was as analytically sober as it was damning for the Kremlin. Despite Putin's rhetoric of inevitable victory, the data showed a Russian military and structural decline. Manufacturing output was falling. Economic growth had slowed to just 0.6% in 2025. Inflation remained stubbornly high. A labor crunch was deepening, worsened by the loss of hundreds of thousands of working-age men to the war. Russia had 0 companies in the global top 100 by technology market capitalization, 0, while the rest of the world's economies raced forward on artificial intelligence, semiconductors, and advanced manufacturing. Putin had traded Russia's long-term economic competitiveness for a war of territorial attrition in eastern Ukraine. And even that territorial attrition, according to British Chief of the General Staff Sir Roland Walker, would require another 5 years and between 1.5 and 1.8 million total casualties to achieve Russia's stated goal of controlling the 4 annexed Ukrainian oblasts, Donetsk, Luhansk, Kherson, and Zaporizhzhia. At current casualty rates, combined Russian and Ukrainian losses could reach 2 million by the spring of 2026, a figure that CSIS described with a kind of restrained horror as unprecedented in any modern conflict. Political scientist Nada Crawford estimated that by July 2025, approximately 323,000 people had been killed in the war, at an average rate of 7,690 deaths per month, surpassing even the rate of fatalities in the war in Gaza. These are not statistics. They are fathers, sons, commanders, engineers, farmers, teachers, a generation of men from both Ukraine and Russia, fed into a conflict that, for all its enormous human cost, has produced territorial gains measured in the width of a city block. According to a leaked Russian dataset published by Ukrainian intelligence's I Want to Live project and cited by ISW, between January and August 2025 alone, Russia suffered 281,550 total losses, including 86,744 killed outright, 33,996 missing, and 158,529 wounded. These are numbers the Kremlin will never acknowledge, figures buried beneath layers of state media narrative and enforced silence. What emerges from all of this data, from the meters per day advances, the casualty reports, the economic indicators, the drone strike tallies, and the strategic assessments, is a portrait of a war that Vladimir Putin cannot win at the pace and cost he is paying, and a portrait of a Ukrainian military that has learned, adapted, and inflicted damage on a scale that no observer in February 2022 would have considered possible. Russia has not been defeated. The front line continues to shift, slowly, painfully, westward in places. Peace negotiations facilitated by Turkey in Istanbul in May 2025, and later by American envoys in Abu Dhabi and Geneva, have produced prisoner exchanges but no ceasefire. Russia continues to demand control of the entire Donbass and a permanent bar on Ukrainian NATO membership. Ukraine continues to refuse the cession of its territory. The war grinds on, as wars of this character always do, not until one side achieves its objectives, but until one side can no longer sustain the cost of trying. The question that hangs over every battlefield briefing, every casualty report, and every diplomatic meeting in 2026 is whether Vladimir Putin has looked at these numbers, really looked at them, and understood what they mean for the country he governs, the army he commands, and the legacy he will leave. History is already writing its verdict. The only question now is how many more men will die before the ledger is finally closed.